Welcome to another episode of Mission Compliance, Unleashing Growth Potential for Defense Contractors. In today's episode, we're diving into a unique and crucial topic for small defense businesses and sole proprietors, the importance of separating duties to enhance security and reduce risk. For most small teams, the idea of separating duties can feel overwhelming. After all, when you wear multiple hats, how do you make sure you're not compromising security? We'll break down how even the smallest businesses can navigate compliance with DFARS, NIST SP 800-171, and CMMC requirements, specifically focused on Control AC L2-3.1.4. Whether you're looking to reduce risk of insider threats or just trying to get your head around these controls in a small team setting, this episode is for you. Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto. We're joined once again today by Mike Frieder, President of On-Call Compliance Solutions and a CMMC Professional Assessor. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Hey, always a pleasure, Roman.
So, Mike, today's a little bit different because even though we've already done an episode on Control 3.1.4, we're actually doing this episode in response to a question we received from a commenter on YouTube on our 3.1.4 control video. So that's why we're doing this episode. So, with that being said, we're taking how AC.L2-3.1.4 applies to small sole proprietor companies because that was specifically the question that was asked to us. So with that being said, what are some practical ways a small business or sole proprietor can implement duty separation when they might only have one or two people managing both operations and IT security?
It's a great question. And it really is a mystery, right? You look at some of these controls and they appear to be written for very large companies. And so you ask yourself, well, how do I separate duties and prevent malevolent activity and all this other kind of stuff when there's only like, I don't know, maybe it's a five-person company or maybe it's, you've only got one person in the IT team. I mean, we work with companies that have hundreds of employees and only have one IT person. So how do you do that? The answer is a lot of this is really found in documentation. A lot of it really depends on how you are writing your policies for, who does the IT person go to for permission? So, for instance, let's say that you have a government contract and there is a point of contact for that government contract. We would call that person the information owner. They're the ones that are downloading it out of, let's say, C folders or some other kind of thing that might contain CUI or defense information. And then, obviously they need a folder. So they'll go to the IT person. They'll say, hey, IT person, could you please, create a folder, put some permissions on it so that only I have permission and, it's CUI in there. It's not just a one-person duty to decide who has access to that folder. It is probably the sales guy or the business development guy or the government point of contact person bringing in the CUI. They're going to work with the person who is in IT, and that is a separation, right? So, and then there has to be written procedures for that, even in a small company, and that is one of the most difficult things about NIST SP 800-171 is you need written procedures so that you can demonstrate to an assessor that there's a system that the system can be followed and that you've really thought this through and that there is in fact security in place. So, the big secret here is a lot of folks, when they're small, are looking for what do I need to implement technologically? And the actual reality is this isn't necessarily always a technological control to solve for. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's a policy that you need to have in place to be able to demonstrate that this is solvable. So I think one of the great challenges for small to mid-sized businesses is understanding when something in NIST SP 800-171 needs a technological solution and when it needs to be a human or personnel policy solution. Very, very challenging to understand those. I think every company is different, and that is definitely one of the places where we as a company really need to come in and help a company to understand that. And I think it's one of the reasons why we're such big champions of the small to mid-sized business. Again, I always say this, we certainly, we have clients with 63,000 plus employees, so we also cater to large businesses, but in the smaller ones, those are a challenge because not every control will be solved in the same way, whether it's a big company or a small company. I think that's really where it helps to have some expert hands in the pie helping that to get figured out. So big challenge, but separation can happen even in very small organizations. Now, what if you're a one-person organization? Very curious there, right? Well, you may not have separation of duties. It may not make any sense to have a separation of duties. That might be a control that you mark as not applicable, right? If you really have one person and you're it, you're the person, right? It's all on your shoulders. You can't separate duties. You're doing it all. That control just doesn't apply to you. Very, very, very rarely do I ever talk about controls that are not applicable. And again, you'd still have to look at all of the assessment points for that control and make sure that you're really meeting the litmus test. If it was me, you might even go really extreme and still create documentation around how you might operate if there were multiple people. Certainly, it's not hard to get a one-person business to be a two or three-person business, and you do need separation. But again, each company is different, and there are some controls that just don't make any sense to apply to a one-person business, and I think that's one of them.
Right. So you already touched on several challenges, but feel free to elaborate when answering this next question. For the small defense contractor, what are the biggest challenges in meeting this duty separation requirement, and are there any common pitfalls they should watch out for?
Yeah, I mean, I think, challenge number one is, are you big enough for separation? So that's something that the organization just has to really sit down, map out, and think about. The way we like to do that is we like to follow the CUI flow and the CUI flow diagram. So I think in that regard, I will share that I think that that is something that is really, really powerful. The second thing that I think is really worth mentioning is it is a challenge to create that documentation. So creating documentation and creating policies is not something to this level that a normal 3 to 5 or 6 person company really goes and does. I wouldn't even say it's all that common in a 20-person company because everybody knows each other. Doesn't matter. If you want to be compliant and you have to prove compliance, well, then the reality is you need to think about the policies that are going to act as the bumpers on compliance, or really, if you're diagramming it out, the bumpers on CUI handling. It's a really big challenge. You've got to put bumpers around CUI handling. And if you don't put those bumpers around CUI handling, well, then in that case, you run into a situation where it's challenging. It's really challenging. You can kind of have CUI flowing all over the place and there's no clear delineation. And so it can cause, for instance, an enclave to be assessed as the entire enterprise because they just can't figure out where CUI is flowing. They keep finding new places. So with all of that, in mind, I think it is very, very useful to, kind of more or less say, hey, look, this is we just have to have those policies kind of written out and explained. So that's a challenge. I think CUI flow and even figuring out where your CUI is flowing is something that most companies would not ordinarily in the course of business take time to do, but you have to with this. And I think that just the small nature of small businesses, right? The idea that most people in a small business are wearing multiple hats, they've got 15 different jobs to do to keep the company afloat. That's a real challenge, real challenge. So I think to put on one more hat, which is a compliance hat, and really dive into how this gets solved, I think that's a challenge. So a lot to learn there. A lot for a small business to take on. You're basically asking really small businesses to do a very mature thing that you wouldn't typically see until they get to be a much larger business that's highly systematized. That I think is, I think that's really a good challenge.
All right, so this next one may or may not be a bit of a softball, but how can small businesses leverage tools or outsourced services to effectively separate duties and meet these compliance requirements? That is, assuming that they need to separate without significantly increasing overhead costs.
That's a great question. And I mean, I don't think that's a softball question at all. I think that speaks to the reality of most small businesses. I'm glad you said that because I got to tell you, my mind was not wandering in that direction. And I think that's a tremendous direction to go in. When you look at the idea of outsourcing, there's an automatic separation of duties and a very clear one, and it's undeniable, and it's really easy for any assessor to point to that and go, that's a separation. I think that outsourcing is the easiest way to create that separation. Here's a great example. Most small companies outsource their IT management. There's bumpers around that you have to, have to know about. So again, the IT company's got to have experience in handling DFARS type information. They got to know what to do with CUIs. They probably need to go through some CUI mandatory training and things like that. But ultimately, you're 100% right. When you outsource, that creates the logical separation that they're looking for. And so you can say, hey, listen, these people are authorized to talk to the outsourced MSP. These people are not. And again, you're going to be needing to put that into a written policy. If it is not in a written policy, how do we know? So, with all that in mind, I think that that's a great, great question. Outsourcing is something that is really big in this ecosystem, especially when it comes to IT. Big companies do it, small companies do it, and outsourcing is very, very important because I got to tell you, IT guys are very expensive. Ask me how I know. I employ an entire company full of them. These are not cheap resources. These are not easy resources to come across, and so it is a challenge. It is a challenge. It's something that we look at and say, do we outsource this? Do we not outsource it? What makes sense for the company? And by the way, that can change over time, which means that your policies and documentation also have to change over time too. So there's a lot of challenges in managing both the outsourced contractor and the documentation that surrounds what you're doing with that outside contractor. All very important challenges. Now, with that in mind, I think that you have to really think about a cost perspective and getting compliant because for small businesses, cost is so, so big when it comes to compliance. I think it's one of the really great areas that On-Call does things differently in. We take a very cost-effective approach. We take a very time-sensitive approach, and we look at what actually has to be done under the law right now. And in that regard, it's just there's a no-brainer. I think On-Call's got the best methodology for doing that. To be able to work with companies that are very small, to be able to help them solve for compliance in just a handful of days, to look at that methodology, I think is amazing. I generally think that uh, hey, you know what? It's something that's very unique and it's a challenge that we have figured out how to overcome. Um, yeah, it's really I think in that regard, um, yeah, I think the outsourcing element is something that, if not done correctly, can wind up having you not compliant. And if done correctly, it can make compliance much, much easier. So I think for that, that's really, what do I think? I think small to mid-sized businesses, when it comes to compliance, it makes all the sense in the world to outsource this. It just, you don't have full-time compliance people on staff usually, and you're a bigger company if you do. And I think that for the bigger companies, a lot of times their compliance people may be in a different area like ISO or AS 9100 or all kinds of other different compliance standards. Do they know DFARS and NIST? Are they willing to learn? Can they learn? Those are, in a lot of cases, you're dealing with quality standards. This is an information security standard, so it's totally different, even though it all looks like compliance to the boss. So I think there are challenges there as well. But yeah, outsourcing, I think it works great. I think another thing too is when it comes to speed, defense contractors just need to get compliant. They need to get compliant now. It's not like, compliance is going to wait around for them to win the contract. They just need to get compliant now. And I think that's another area where I think our outsourcing of compliance and compliance management really is a huge winner. Again, we hold the hand, we walk across the finish line. It's an incredible, incredible thing that we do. And I think that, it's just one of those situations that makes a lot of sense.
Awesome. So before we get into our normal silly question, I want to take this moment to reiterate the importance of if you have questions about compliance and you don't just want to straight up call us, which I recommend you do because we have compliance experts there to help. If you have questions about compliance or questions about one of our YouTube videos, such as one of the controls or some of the other videos that we put out, feel free to leave a comment on that video because this episode exists because of a YouTube comment that we saw. So if you have a question, put it in the comments and it may be a podcast episode. That is my plea with our listeners. If you have questions, ask them because we may answer them directly. Uh,
Yeah, and by the way, we love the comments, you guys. I mean,
we
it's
do.
I think it's one of the things that really keeps us going every week is, to know that you guys are out there listening, to know that we're out there providing value. That's really what drives us, you guys. I mean, it's not like this is something that we do out of a passion for disseminating information to you, the defense contractor, particularly the small to mid-sized defense contractor, if you're under 10,000 employees, heck, if you're one employee, right? This is for you guys. And by the way, again, I know I got some clients that are like way over 10,000 employees. We love you guys too. Don't worry. Lots of great information in here for you as well. But there's this great large majority of defense contractors out here that just bang their head against these issues every week. The big ones, look, you can afford to come hire us, all right? We're already probably one of the most cost-effective solutions out there, certainly the fastest. And I'll just share with you that I think it's one of those things that if you, again, if you're struggling and you're trying to get compliant, just call. All right, go to one of our go to one of our many websites, fill out a form. You're talking directly to CMMC certified people on our at our company. We don't have anyone that you will never make first contact with a person who is not at least a CMMC registered practitioner with a very good background in compliance at our company. We just you're not just going to talk to your average sales guy when you call us. That's not how that works. We're going to first focus on getting you the answers you need, and then if you really are in a place where you feel like, hey, I'd really like to turn this over to on-call and let them handle it. Hey, you know what? That's a separate conversation anyway. Let's just focus on what your current day questions are. And you know what? Hey, we love running your business out there. We certainly have a business to run, but it's one of these things that we decided a long time ago we want to do for the defense industrial base is just give them resources that they can ask questions to who aren't going to waste their time and who can really focus in on the answer to those easy questions.
And we even responded to that commenter and said, "Hey, once we became aware that we were going to do this podcast as a way to answer his question, we said, hey, pay attention because the answer to your question is coming soon in the form of an entire podcast episode. So ask your questions and we will answer them one way or another. That is what we are here to say at On Call. So with that being said, it's time for our silly question that we do every week. We try to take a complex and sometimes pretty dry topic like compliance and make it fun with a silly question to end each episode. And it seems more often than not, these silly questions always come back to superheroes. We love superheroes here at On Call. There's a sign behind Mike's head and behind mine as well with a shield that says compliance hero. Like it's all, it looks kind of like Captain America shield, it's a theme at the company, so why not go back to superheroes? So this one is a bit complex, so stay with me, Mike. If you had to assign superhero personas to your team's duties to prevent any one person from going rogue, who would be the gatekeeper, the detective, and the fixer, and why?
Ooh, okay, all right. So I'm gonna ask you for some help on this one. So the first one was a gatekeeper.
First one was the gatekeeper.
It's a good question. I'd probably go with Magneto. I guess he's a super
Nice.
villain. Can I use super villains?
Hey, he has superpowers.
He probably
So
did
yes.
something good at some point in his life. He can't be all bad.
I mean,
He just has.
a little superhero lore for our friends. Before he went bad, he was best friends with Charles Xavier, and they opened the school together. They opened
Mhm.
the X-Men school together. Anyway, so Gatekeeper is Magneto. So who would be the detective?
I mean, let's be honest. Even bad guys think they're doing good, right? I mean, that's like they just have a different perspective. The gatekeeper would have to be Magneto because the guy has control over magnets, so he could really keep the gate super, super good. He could demagnetize the gate and open the gate. So I'll give that answer because that's a literal answer, and why not? Now, what were the other two?
The next one was the detective. Who's the detective that investigates any potential problems?
That's a great question. That's a really great
Well,
question.
I have an answer.
Okay, go ahead.
If we're gonna mix universes to create the most fortifiable group, formidable, I should say, I'd say Batman because he is first and foremost when Batman was created, he was created as a detective. He's the world's best detective. So if
Oh,
you so if you need a detective, Batman originated as Detective Comics, that kind of thing. So if you need a detective, why not go to the detective,
I didn't
Batman?
even know that. I just thought he was
Batman.
like an Elon Musk rich guy who was bored.
Well, I think he evolved into that. He evolved to DC's Tony Stark. But
There you go.
and then so my answer is detective. I don't know, or my answer is Batman. I don't know if you have a better answer or a different answer for detective.
Not at all. I'm going to go
But
with your answer because I think that is a better answer, unless unless you gave the answer of Inspector Gadget.
Hey, there you
Because
go. But look, like Gotham is like the number one place of problems. Like whenever I see anything Batman related, I'm like, why would anyone live in Gotham? There's always something going wrong. So Batman is always on alert. So what could be better than a detective who's always ready? So
see,
in
I
a
like
cyber
that.
so in a cybersecurity situation, you want a detective who is always on the ball. And
See,
that's
I
Batman.
love that because Gotham is like being a defense contractor, right? Nobody is attacked more in the cybersecurity realm than defense contractors. I mean, they're just the number one target. And for you guys out there in defense, if you're an IT guy, if you've ever looked at your firewall, right? We're on the same side. It's brutal to be an IT guy and keep an organization protected. Just in uh, an unreasonable number of attempts to breach systems from defense contractors versus any other commercial business you could possibly be in. So I agree. I think Gotham City, if you're a defense contractor and you're in the defense industry, maybe Gotham City is very much like the defense industry. It's just highly targeted by mobsters.
So the last one would be, so we have the gatekeeper, it's Magneto. We have the detective, that is Batman. The last one's the fixer. Who would be the fixer?
Ooh, well, the fixer would obviously be super on call, right? I mean, we basically, so like on call is, the Charles Xavier Academy. Right? We take in people just like our listeners here on this podcast, and we teach them and we train them and we give them the backup they need to succeed and to go out there and be their own compliance superhero. So, you know what? The third superhero, it's you guys out there, the audience.
Super on call. I don't know if that's exactly going to make it on a t-shirt, but we'll roll with it for the sake of the question, and also branding. Uh, and that wraps up another great episode of Mission Compliance. We hope our discussion today has provided you with valuable insights, practical strategies, and inspiration to navigate the ever-evolving world of defense. We'd like to extend our appreciation to Mike for for the valuable insight on this crucial topic, and remind our users once again, if you have questions, comment on the YouTube videos. Thanks, Mike.
Hey, always a pleasure, Roman. Thanks for having me.
But the conversation doesn't end here. We encourage you to continue exploring these topics and connect with us on our social media channels. Share your thoughts, ask questions, and engage with fellow listeners using the hashtag Mission Compliance Podcast. If they haven't already, what should they do, Mike?
Well, they should like, subscribe, and for sure tell a friend in the defense industry about our podcast. It's fun to listen to.
You heard him, and we'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate and review the show. Your feedback helps us to continue to bring you thought-provoking episodes and high-quality content. Join us next time as we delve further into the dynamic world of defense, security, and industry innovation. Until then, take care, stay informed, and make compliance your mission. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.